Alrighty. Hello, everybody. I see some familiar faces pouring in. Nice to see you. Ooh, we have a call-in. Ooh, that's fun. Someone's just listening. Also, apologies. I do live in Brooklyn on a small but heavily trafficked street. So sometimes in the evenings, we hear some fun sirens and trucks trying to get around the corner. So hopefully we won't be interrupted. And where are you both joining me from? I'm in Brooklyn. Julia, where are you?
So I am from Boston, but I am currently in Florida. I'm in Clearwater, Florida, as of a couple of minutes ago. And so it's, nice warm weather here, but pouring.
Okay, amazing. It's like that Florida, like humidity.
Yes.
And I'm about 10 miles north of Seattle, Washington, and it's a beautiful day out.
Amazing.
Sunny, nice weather.
I feel like every time I visit Seattle, it's beautiful and sunny. My sister lives there, and then she's always like, "Don't get used to it. You're lucky." Like,
I know.
Amazing. Well, let's get started. We've got tons of content today. Well, a little bit of content, tons of discussion today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we will jump right into it. All righty. Y'all can see that title slide. Awesome. All right, we're calling this the Brooklyn FI Guide to Marriage and Prenups. We're going to solve all of your marital problems in this 30-minute presentation. Just kidding, we're not going to do that. All right, so prenups or prenuptial agreements have a long history of scandal and intrigue, but the Brooklyn FI team, that's me, and some very special guests, that's you guys, are here to redeem them. We've got Julia and Sarabeth, the co-founders of Hello Prenup, to walk us through every thought that's ever crossed your mind about actually implementing one of these things. We hear a lot of talk about these prenups. Who actually has one? When does it make sense to get one? What are the ins and outs? How much does it cost? We're going to get into all of those nitty-gritty details today. We did have some questions submitted ahead of time, so we'll get to those first, but please feel free. We will have time at the end for open questions. Feel free to also throw them in the chat as you think of them, and we'll circle back to them when we're ready. I'm AJ Ayers. I'm one of the co-founders here at Brooklyn FI. I'll be presenting a little bit, but mostly moderating with our two guests. And I would love to hear from our guests. Julia, tell us about yourself.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Julia, and I am the CEO and co-founder of Hello Prenup. I am a family law attorney in Massachusetts, and I have a lot of experience with seeing prenups from the perspective of an attorney and also the side of divorce, which is why I created Hello Prenup when I spoke to all of these potential prenup clients who were really looking for a service that was a little bit more efficient, cost effective, and more collaborative.
Awesome.
And I'm Sarabeth. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Hello Prenup. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm based out of Seattle, Washington. I'm a software engineer. I worked at big companies like Microsoft, small startups and nonprofits. And last February, I got engaged and I started looking into how to get a prenup. And I started reaching out to attorneys, and I realized there was no great software-based platform for couples like myself to get a prenuptial agreement. So I started working on a solution, and Julia and I came together to work on Hello Prenup.
Amazing. And also for our audience, something very exciting that the two of you were on Shark Tank recently. Like, this idea is so good that it went on national television.
That's right. And we were actually the first legal tech platform to ever be on Shark Tank. So we're really proud of that.
Amazing. Amazing. Yeah, it's, from my perspective as a financial planner, a lot of our clients come to us unmarried, meaning they have a live-in partner, they're engaged, or maybe they're planning on getting engaged. And we talk about prenups. In New York City, where there are plenty of divorce attorneys, typically a client will come to us and say, I need a prenup. We'll, pull out our registry of lawyers, and then the client will get shocked at the price tag, that it's somewhere between maybe on the low end, $5,000 a spouse, on the high end, $20,000, $30,000. So, this is at Brooklyn FI, we love tech. So if we can solve something with tech and then have a human look it over, which is really what I believe Hello Prenup is. So I love the product. We recommend it here. So I'm so excited to chat with you guys today.
Exactly.
Thank you.
For having us.
Amazing. So yeah, post your comments in the chat. I'll get to them. And then we will post a recording of this on our website in a few days. And okay, cool. So here's my little portion. I get a ton of questions about this, which is we're thinking about marriage. I just got engaged with my partner, or we're getting serious. We moved in together. We both have our own financial lives. Should we merge finances, and what should that look like? And my response is always this, which is that it's really a spectrum. On one hand, all the way on the left here, we have completely separate accounts. Bills are split. Every time you go out to dinner, you split bills. Every time you're on vacation, each of you pull out a credit card. Totally separate financial lives. This is usually best for business owners. A lot of our clients, where we might have one spouse as a business owner or both spouses as a business owner, you have to keep things separate, right? We have a business account. It's just too complicated to add things together. You don't really see what's going on with the other partner. For some folks, this works. I have my own money. I want to spend it. We come together. We agree on that. But that's kind of one extreme, right? And then the other extreme, all the way on the right, we have only joint accounts. We don't have any separate accounts. It's very simple. This is for folks who like to stay organized, don't want to have a bunch of things to deal with, don't want to have a bunch of tax documents to deal with. Checking accounts, savings accounts, everything are in both spouses' name. It's easy to understand the cash flow of the family this way, right? Income comes in, expenses go out. Maybe you have one or two credit cards. It's very beautiful. Often, as a financial planner, when I see joint accounts, I get so excited because it's so easy for me. I can just see everything. Whereas most of the time, we've got two different spouses or two different partners with like 15 of their own accounts. But really, most people fall somewhere in the middle, where they have their separate financial lives. Maybe they have separate checking accounts for salary that's coming in and maybe personal expenses, but there's a joint savings account. There's some central place to do things as a couple. Joint savings account for fun things like vacations. A lot of times when you get married, people will give you gifts. I always think that starting a joint savings account to hold those gifts is a great starting place if you haven't merged finances before. Maybe there's a shared credit card. Maybe you put all vacations or all dinners that you go out together on this credit card and you split the bill at the end of the month. I've also seen some clients have success with splitting bills according to their income percentages. Sometimes we have one spouse making, 2 or 3 times what the other spouse is making just by the fact of their chosen profession. Maybe they should pay a little bit more of the rent. My best advice for anyone is don't overcomplicate it, right? The more you talk about money in your relationship, the more you create this complexity ongoing, like, let's split this, you owe me this for rent. It creates unnecessary friction. There's nothing less romantic than saying like, hey babe, like rent was due like last week, can you Venmo me that? We try to avoid that if we can through good financial planning. And this one, all the expenses are maybe paid from different accounts, but everything is visible in one central place. Maybe you're using a tool where everyone can see everything that's going on. There's visibility, even though you're separate. I'm curious to hear from Sarabeth and Julia, if you don't mind sharing, like, where do you fall, either like personally or like maybe there's a story that you've heard of, like, what do you think works best here, or any tips here for combining finances?
I would, my opinion on this kind of comes from both my personal experience, but also what I've seen work for the vast majority of couples getting married, and then seeing the divorce end of it and seeing what doesn't work. What I see most often not work, and again, I just want to preface this with everybody's different, it depends on personalities. What I see doesn't work is when people just don't talk about any of it. And then all of a sudden, 10 years down the line, it's like, I didn't even know he had that business. I didn't know he had a house in, California. And it's just because they didn't talk about it. And it seems crazy, but I can't tell you how many stories I've heard like that. I think somewhere, for me, both personally and then from a professional perspective, somewhere in the middle is where people find the most success. So I would also say the vast majority of the prenups that I've seen fall somewhere in the middle. So they keep everything separate in terms of income and assets, and potential inheritance. And then they have a joint account. And then on top of that, they have some type of phase in of separate assets. So they do that either by lump sum payments, or they do that by phasing in percentages of the separate property at a certain date, or in increments throughout the marriage, or they have something called a sunset clause, where basically the prenup expires at a certain period, and then everything after that is just in accordance with state law, which is typically closer to 50-50 at that point. So that's, I think, somewhere in the middle, as it is catered to the couple, is oftentimes the most successful.
Yeah, I see the same thing. How about you, Sarabeth?
So I'm actually still engaged. So we don't have any joint accounts right now, but it's funny that you brought up the rent based off of salary proportion, because that's exactly what my partner and I do. And it's worked out great for us as I've changed different jobs, started my own business. Things kind of change as your life changes as well. But I think having a base where your large expenses are agreed upon, and then for us, at least, our daily expenses like our groceries or pet bills, for example, we split those all 50-50. And having agreed upon this, at the very beginning of our relationship has really created a solid foundation so that we're never really stressed about money, whether our rent goes up or down. We can kind of figure things out there. And on the topic of pets, you can actually include in your prenup how you guys are going to be paying for your pet's expenses and who takes custody of the pet. So there's a lot of like finessing that you can do in your agreement to like really plan for the future.
Yeah, I feel like a pet custody decision is necessary for any type of relationship, not for marriage, because that's, anyway.
Yes, very important to us.
I've seen it through friends and clients like go very, it can be very sad if obviously breaking up is sad, but losing your dog or your cat, very sad. Anyways, so some questions that we got ahead of time from attendees. Should I max out my Roth accounts before getting married if my tax bracket is going to change? Very interesting question. I'll take this one. So in theory, yes, I would love for everyone to max out their Roth accounts every year. It's a fantastic tax deferred way to save money. However, if you are currently able to make a Roth contribution, that means that you make, I forget the cutoff offhand, but it's about less than $130,000. You are able to make a Roth contribution. If you make above that, you actually are phased out and you're not allowed to make a Roth IRA contribution. So if you were asking me this question, now in March, should I go ahead and max out my Roth IRA because I'm getting married later this year? I would say absolutely don't do that, because in terms of taxes, if you are married on December 31st of that year, you are considered married for the whole year. So this person is asking, is my tax bracket going to change? We don't know. Once the two incomes come together, we have to look at them together as we file the tax return, and that's going to determine if you can make a Roth contribution. So I would actually tread very lightly about making a Roth contribution if your tax situation or your income is going to change drastically, such as getting married and adding a second income. Let's see, any advice for couples not yet engaged but cohabitating on navigating finances and prepping financially for engagement or marriage? I think we just talked a little bit about that, but Sarabeth or Julia, anyone want to jump in and offer some great advice for newly engaged couples?
My advice would be just to talk about finances. I think that's the number one thing people neglect and they push off. And not just, this is what my income is. Talk about how you view money. Really get into the psychology of it. How did you grow up? How do you see yourself living 10 to 15 years from now? And then, how does your family, meaning your parents, how do they view money? Because that is going to obviously affect your perspective and also if you're getting a prenuptial agreement, it may affect how inheritance is viewed in that prenuptial agreement. So just having the conversation, I think, is really step one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and definitely the timing of having that conversation is very important. So ideally, before you get engaged, you would have these conversations kind of on a regular basis about where you both are at financially. And hopefully before you get engaged, you bring up the topic of a prenup if that's something that you're considering, so that you are not kind of throwing it on your partner a few weeks before your marriage date. You really want to kind of time these things and kind of having these drips of conversations about finances and separating out the emotional component of these conversations with the truly practical of how do you want your life to look finance-wise. I think that's probably the best way to go.
Absolutely. I mean, we have clients come in the door who have been, engaged for a year, and really our first meeting when we put everything together, in the financial planning software and we see all the accounts, that's the first time they've ever seen the balance in their spouse's checking account. Or in our case, we work specifically with folks who have stock options. And everyone made the same income forever. All of a sudden, one spouse's company is going public. All of a sudden, they have $1 million, overnight. That changes things. That changes the dynamics, in a relationship, of course. I think one question I get asked a lot is like, who should pay for the wedding? Like, should we split the wedding? If there's not money coming in from parents or relatives, who is responsible for that? And I don't really have a good answer for that. I don't know if splitting it 50-50 is the best way. If someone wants a beautiful big wedding and they have the money, I don't think that entering into that relationship with that like baggage is a great idea. I don't know if either of you have thoughts on paying for a wedding.
Yeah, well, I have a lot of thoughts on this because I went through it. And my husband and I went back and forth. And, it's funny, I always joke, he was kind of a bridezilla and he wanted like this really big wedding and I didn't. And, obviously a really big wedding is expensive. So what we ended up doing was compromising both on the size of the wedding, but then we compromised on other things. I wanted a lot of flowers. That was really expensive. We kind of scaled that back in order to be able to invite a few more people. And then we didn't split the cost, but we parsed out the cost in accordance with our incomes. So at the time he was earning more than me. So we just did it in proportion. And I think it worked out really well because we had to have this really, it's a really exciting time, but we had to have this really serious conversation around this really special day, extremely emotional. But I'm so glad we did because it kind of forced us to feel really comfortable talking about money with respect to something that was so important to us.
Absolutely. And weddings can be so stressful and they can go over budget so quickly, and it can just create this like horrible friction and like a bad taste in your mouth about money in your relationship. And we'll talk about it, but I think prenups are kind of a way to actually have a great conversation about money. At what net worth or asset level do you typically recommend that a couple get a prenup?
Julia, I think you know this one.
I know, we're both looking at each other like, everyone should have one. I don't care if you have $0 in your bank account and $200,000 in student debt. You should have one. Why? Because you should be protecting your spouse from having to absorb your student debt in a divorce. I think even if you're saying, look, I have no debt, but I have no assets. People always say, oh, I didn't get a prenup because we didn't have anything. Well, of course, a lot of people don't have anything when they get married, but a lot of people do, and you will probably earn some assets. If you have a job, if you're watching this webinar, if you have any type of aspiration to make any income in the future, you will have some asset or income that you want to protect. And let's say you're a total couch potato, you may have inheritance that you will want to protect, right? Or your parents will want you to protect. So everybody should get a prenup. I don't see any excuse why you wouldn't. A lot of people used to say, oh, it's too expensive. I don't want to hire a divorce lawyer. Well, that's where Hello Prenup comes in. And now it's affordable for everyone. So nobody has any excuse.
Yeah, and I invited you on here because I love your product, and like I truly believe in it. I think it's, not only is it, affordable, but also the way that you've designed the product. It's not just, here's a legal document that's going to protect everybody's assets. It's actually, let's think about this. I have to ask you some maybe uncomfortable questions, but I'm going to ask both of you, and you're going to talk about your answers together. So a prenup it's really a conversation. I find that it just has such a negative connotation, which is that if you are asking your spouse to, enter this process with you, you automatically are saying, I don't trust you. And it's actually way the opposite of that. It's really making sure that they're protected. You love each other. You want to make sure that, everyone feels like, they're entering this relationship with clarity and transparency and all that. That's a whole other topic for another time, is having a successful marriage.
Well, I think AJ, you touched on a really important topic or subject there, because oftentimes prenups are viewed as one-sided. And even when you use the traditional attorney model, one lawyer, one side is giving the other side a draft of something. And they're saying, this is what I'm thinking. Here it is, go figure it out with your lawyer or represent yourself. And that's where it creates this real tension in the relationship. And so that's why Sarabeth and I created Hello Prenup the way we did, because the process is collaborative. So there's no draft being handed to anybody until both of you have answered the Q&A and have gone through the negotiation phase. So I think that's a really important part of the process.
Awesome. I'm going to switch gears for a minute. That's kind of the end of the slides. And I want to have a conversation. I've got a ton of questions. Why do I need one? What is it? How much does it cost? I think that's really, people are here because they know they need one. And kind of like estate planning documents, like, getting a will in place and thinking about your death. Like, no one wants to think about their relationship ending or having to split assets. Like, it's like not a pleasant thought. So why should we, why is this so important? Like, convince our listeners to get a prenup. Why do we need this in place?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about why I wanted to get a prenup. The first reason I wanted to get a prenup is basically how I was raised. I was raised to be very financially responsible, very financially savvy. And I really view a prenup as a financial planning tool for both yourself and your partner to kind of plan out your marital finances and the life that you want to live together. Just from the fact that you have to disclose all of your finances within your prenup for it to be valid is a forcing function for you to have those conversations. And the second reason I wanted to get a prenup is because I always knew I wanted to start my own business. A lot of people around our age are starting their own small businesses or taking a risk in starting a startup, and a prenup actually can protect your business in the case of a divorce. So it's really important to protect those things that you're putting your heart and soul into. And the last thing, I'm a pretty logical, realistic person, and I think a prenup is kind of similar to insurance, like car insurance, health insurance. You never want to cash out on those sort of things. You never want your prenup to be enforced, but it's kind of one of those things, one of those adulting things that you have to do because you know that it will protect you in the future. And I think there's tons of reasons that people should be getting prenups. But the main thing is that it forces you to have these conversations so that you're not stressed out in your marriage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and I just want to,
okay.
I'm sorry, I just want to add to that. I think Sarabeth makes really great points. And a lot of people don't realize this, but essentially, if you don't have a prenuptial agreement in place, you essentially have a default prenup based on your state's laws. So people don't typically think, and they're not, warned of, this is your state's divorce law based on the length of your marriage. before they get married. And I think if they knew that and they knew what those rules looked like and how those rules would control how their assets and income are divided upon divorce, they would then get a prenup because it allows them to decide for themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the reality is there's so many unknown variables in that too. The laws of your state could change within your marital period, or you move states, and all these different things could be changing. So really a prenup is a way for you to take it into your own hands and decide, while you still love your partner, if something happens, what do you want to work out, and how can both of you be okay after it?
The business owner portion of this is I think just kind of gets forgotten about, especially because people think of like, oh, I have a consulting business or whatever, but don't think that, if there is a divorce in the future, or if let's say the two of you are in a business partnership, I'm also in a business partnership, if something were to go wrong with one of our relationships, without a prenuptial agreement, our spouse would potentially be entitled to half of that business and half of that decision making. What if they had forced us into a sale? It just creates this and there's so many horror stories about these nasty family and nasty relationship dramas, just because it wasn't said, yeah, this is my business, I want to carve this out. This is something that's separate. Obviously, I'll share the profits with you throughout our marriage, and potentially even after. But the ownership remains with me because I know the business, and maybe the spouse doesn't.
Yep.
So we're talking about specific states. Most of our clients are either in New York or California, and often they're moving between the two. Any red flags, any things that we need to be aware about, prenups or enforcing them specifically in New York or California?
Yes. So California is a fun state because it is the most complicated state when it comes to prenups. So in California, if you're getting a prenup for California, you really want to make sure that you follow California's rules. So one of those rules, for example, is that the prenup, there has to be 7 days before presentation, I'm sorry, in between presentation of the final agreement and signatures. So you need 7 full days. A lot of people wait until the week of their wedding and they're like, oh, I'll just do it the day before. Don't do that if you're in California. Most other states, the courts will still enforce the agreement. It is not enough to invalidate it, but in California, it potentially is. Another thing about California to know is that if you're using a platform like Hello Prenup and you're either waiving or modifying spousal support against what the default law is, you do need, or the party who is waiving or modifying needs an attorney at the time that the agreement is signed. So that's another complicating factor when we're talking about timing, is finding an attorney who's available, who you feel comfortable with, and who fits in your budget in a week is virtually impossible. So if you're in California and you're waiving or modifying spousal support, leave yourself enough time to find an attorney. Another interesting piece for California is, there's something called financial disclosures in a prenuptial agreement. In the vast majority of states say, look, all you need to do is list out what those account balances are. It's full and fair disclosure, right? California requires an additional waiver of further disclosures if the parties choose not to exchange actual documents, so statements or valuations or appraisals. And so that's something that's important to keep in mind, because there are a lot of these online prenup generators that are not Hello Prenup, right, that are not state specific. And it's a question we get a lot of is, well, what makes you guys different? Well, we are state specific. So for example, if you were to leave something like that out, or leave out a waiver of attorney representation in a state like California, I mean, your prenup isn't going to be worth the paper it's printed on, right? So you really want to make sure that you're doing it right. In a state like New York is much more liberal. So again, they require full and fair disclosure, but they do not require attorney representation. So California is more likely to uphold provisions that in California you would need attorney representation in order to ensure are valid. And in fact, New York does allow couples to contract to things like child custody that maybe California would not. However, it gets really, really dicey when you start getting into support, child support and child custody. I would say leave it out of your prenup altogether, because the court is going to override what's in it anyway. And, you know, I think it's unethical to try and, contract away child support. A court's going to override it regardless.
Yeah.
So those are the main things to keep in mind. I know the list was long.
I think
No,
the takeaway is that each state has its own guidelines and requirements for prenup validity. And so you can actually go on helloprenup.com and select your state. And we list out very clearly what the requirements are for each individual state. But again, it's a timing thing. If you're in California and if either of you want to waive spousal support, AKA alimony, make sure that you guys are having this conversation very early on, way before your marriage date, so that if you do want to waive that, then you can hire an attorney. And in that case, a lot of our customers use Hello Prenup as a way to draft their prenuptial agreement document and then take it to an attorney. So they're still saving thousands of dollars being billed attorney time to draft the document, but they're able to waive alimony in that case.
Awesome. And speaking of states, if, which state should I get my prenup in? Is it where I live? Is it the state that I get married in? A lot of folks have destination weddings. Like, where do I actually need this? And what if I'm the kind of person that lives between New York and Los Angeles, half and half? Do I need prenups in both states? Like, what does that look like as we're moving around, as we all become much more, mobile in the past couple of years?
Yes. So this is called choice of law. And this is a question that we get all the time. And I understand why it's confusing. So, very generally speaking, the default is your prenup should be for the state where you plan to reside. So then we often get the follow-up question of, okay, well, I live in California now, but I'm moving to New York. I'm probably moving to New York in a couple of months. So what do I do? Well, you can actually weigh out which state's laws you like better. So in that instance, I would say, well, you're talking about a community property state of California versus an equitable division state of New York. So you really have to think about, how does New York view divorce and alimony, and how does California view it? And I would say New York is probably a little bit more liberal when it comes to how you're contracting and how they're upholding prenups. So you may want to choose New York. Again, I can't give you legal advice right now, but that's generally what I would say. And so, it can get really complicated when people say to us, well, I'm actually choosing between, these 5 states because now I can work remotely and I just can't decide where I want to live. Well, in that case, you should probably talk to attorneys from all of those 5 states if that's what you want to do, and weigh out your options. But generally speaking, again, a prenuptial agreement should not be for the state in which you get married. It should be for the state where you plan to reside.
Where you plan to be.
Yes.
What about, we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but there's this idea of this attorney. This attorney needs to come in. This attorney is going to draft this document. That attorney is going to draft a document. It's going to send it to another attorney to review. That's typically the way these have worked, throughout the stereotype, and in movies and in headlines, we see, wealthy man married, wealthy elder gentleman marries, much younger woman. The children of said older gentleman want to protect, their inheritance. So we talk about a prenup. How is Hello Prenup different? How are attorneys involved? Just tell me a little bit about what the process looks like, because it's so different from that horrible stereotype.
Yes. So there are no attorneys involved in Hello Prenup. It was obviously developed by attorneys, including myself. And we also have advisors in different states who help us with the nuances of complicated state law, like, for example, California. And so it is created with obviously state-specific requirements in mind, but there is no attorney representing you. So you don't have to, a lot of people say, oh, don't I have to have a lawyer? You don't have to have a lawyer to create a contract, a legally binding contract, unless state statute requires you to. like in California with the spousal support. So that's where Hello Prenup comes in, is we've basically taken technology, married it with what the law is, to allow people to create a legally binding agreement without having to pay an attorney thousands of dollars. So again, if you are someone who has a really complicated financial structure, or you have, legal questions, or you just really want to be represented by an attorney, a lot of people will choose to use Hello Prenup for their base prenuptial agreement, like Sarabeth said, and then bring that agreement to an attorney now that it's in its full form. And they've negotiated it with their spouse and all of their finances are in there. And then that attorney can give them advice on that agreement. Alternatively, again, you don't have to hire an attorney.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, to speak to the stereotype of the older gentleman, forcing the prenup upon the young woman, we're really proud that 50% of our customers identify as female. So it is really interesting to see the demographics changing. As more women are in the workforce, more women are college educated and higher earners, more of them want to protect themselves with a prenup. So it's not just men who are looking to get prenups. We're seeing a pretty 50-50 split.
Awesome. That's great to hear. And we see that at Brooklyn FI across our client base as well. Also with same-sex couples, there's a lot more. That stereotype is so old, but I think the idea of a prenup to our generation is still so new. Like, I feel like we just got over estate planning. Like, okay, we're good with estate planning. We understand we need a will because, our parents are maybe passing away. We are starting to understand the importance of that. But, we haven't had friends get divorced yet. So we don't quite understand, and I'm using we generally, 20s, 30s, and 40s, we don't quite understand, what happens if you don't have a prenup and just how destructive that can be. Divorce happens, right? It's the rates are going up. It is possible to have an amicable divorce where things are split and, it's not messy and it doesn't cost a ton of money because you invested early on. It's not just the money, right? Of course, Hello Prenup is a much, much lower cost solution than the attorneys, but it's really, and I think you both would agree, the investment in the time to talk about this stuff, and investment in, it's a hard conversation. We can't lie, right? It's not comfortable to just put it all out there and say like, hey babe, should we get a prenup on Sunday night? Like that is hard. So, just to be clear, the platform, you come to it, you fill out a questionnaire, your spouse or your future spouse fills out a questionnaire, and Hello Prenup actually creates the document for you. And at that point, assuming you don't have those state specific situations, it's ready to go. Your prenup's done. Is it really that simple?
You do need to get it notarized. So I don't know of a state that doesn't suggest notarization with any contract is essential for validity of that contract. So whether it's required or not, we say get your contract notarized. And we use notarize.com. So they're really great. It can be done completely virtually in about 15 to 20 minutes. And Sarabeth, I think that costs what, $25 or something?
$25. Yeah.
$25.
And I will say, before I got involved with Hello Prenup, I had never even heard of notarization or notaries. So it's one of those educational things of our generation. Maybe you're not even familiar with the fact that you should be getting this document notarized. So we help people walk through that entire process. But yes, that's it. You just sign up, you fill out the questionnaire and negotiate. We generate a completely normal looking Word document that you can take to an attorney if you want it to get revised or updated in any way, and then you can get it notarized.
And then I just want to mention 3 original copies. So I always say each partner should keep one separately, and then you should keep one together in a safe place, like a safety deposit box or a safe.
what about if you're already married? What if for whatever reason you got married and it's afterwards you just maybe you didn't know about the 7-day rule and you're both into it, you both want to get a prenup, but it's too late, you're already married. Can you get an agreement once the marriage has already happened? And what does that look like?
You can get a postnup. So first of all, if you're in California and you're missing that like 7-day window, I would call an attorney right away and see if there's some type of waiver that could be put into place, because I always want to stress the fact that I think a prenup in any case is better than no prenup at all. People always ask, well, my wedding is 2 days away. Should I just throw my hands up and say, whatever? I'll just get a postnup later. And I say, no, get a prenup if it's at all possible to do so. Because a postnups are great, right? They are accepted in many states, but they are not as readily accepted as prenuptial agreements are. And so courts view them very differently, because at the time that you are contracting, you are already married. So you have to think that clock is already ticking. Those assets are already as a part of your marriage. And so courts are less likely to enforce postnuptial agreements than they are prenuptial agreements, which are conditioned on you getting married in the first place. And then there are many states that just won't enforce them at all. And I like to say, postnups are prenups of, 15 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were less accepted, they were less common. I think postnups will become far more common in the next 5 to 10 years. But again, if you have the opportunity to get a prenuptial agreement, get a prenup. If all else fails, get a postnup.
I have one more question, which is, what are, I think we all kind of have a general idea of what's in a prenup. What happens if this relationship, falls apart and we need to part ways? What happens to mostly the finances? What happens to the property? What are some things that are in a prenup that a person who's not familiar might be surprised by? What are some weird clauses you've seen or things that you've heard people ask for?
Well, yeah, I've heard it all. In terms of my practice, I've seen, everything from clothing allowances to yearly gifts of, crazy, Chanel bags or crazy sums of money. But I think something that would surprise people about prenups and Hello Prenup is that we have a mechanism in place to actually protect the less wealthy spouse, or in the case of the majority of women who in marriages choose to have children and are taken out of the workforce for a significant period of time, whether that be 3 years or 10 years. So that's something we call lump sum payments. And this is not super common in all prenups. I think it's what I like to call a creative solution. So what it does is allow the couple to decide on yearly increments. So whether it be 3-year increments or 5-year increments, depending on how long they're married, the wealthier spouse or the spouse that is continually working will actually pay out to the less wealthy spouse upon divorce certain sums of money. And this is important per the conversation of, are we going to have kids? And if we do have kids, realistically, is one of us going to have to take some time off? And, if you say, no, we're both going to keep working full speed and nobody's going to take time off, well, I just challenge you to reconsider that because it's really difficult. And I think a lot of women experience this. And once they take time off, what they end up seeing is that they're in a position where the wealth gap has widened. Their potential earning capacity is greatly decreased. And then in their prenup, they have waived alimony. And even if they haven't waived alimony, frankly, their state law probably doesn't provide them sufficient alimony. If you do out child support and alimony calculations based on a 15-year marriage, you're never going to get your career back from the last 15 years. Meanwhile, your spouse's earning trajectory is, straight up, right? So that's something I think people would be really surprised by, is that a prenup, and specifically Hello Prenup, can actually protect both parties and more specifically the lower earning spouse.
Yeah, It's so hard, right? It's, you enter into this agreement, everything's great. You're in your 20s, you both have, high paying tech jobs, everyone's a software engineer, everything's equal, and I think that's maybe that's like the dark side of a prenup in some ways is, of course everything should be equal. Yeah, we're never gonna have kids. Well, what if you change your mind? What if one spouse does inherit, a cottage? Like, it's really preparing you for things you don't know. It's the unknowable. It's like Sarabeth, you said earlier, it's insurance, right? We don't know what's going to happen. We, hope these bad things don't happen, like a divorce or a death, but they can.
Yeah. And coming at this space from a non-legal perspective, there is also a clause that you can include in your prenup called a sunset clause, which allows you to basically put an expiration date on your prenuptial agreement. So if you're married for 20 years, you guys are probably going to last. So, it actually provides a lot of flexibility. And if your spouse is uncomfortable with the idea of a prenup, you can say, hey, if this marriage works out for 10 years, then maybe we don't need this piece of insurance in the case that we separate. So I think, there's a lot of different ways that you can make the prenup work for both people in the relationship.
Awesome. Any final parting words of wisdom or thoughts on prenuptial agreements?
I think my final thought or word of wisdom would just be, remember that they should be collaborative. Again, people oftentimes think about prenups as protecting one party over the other, or keeping things from one party. And we just don't think that's how prenup should be viewed. We think that it should really be a collaborative process. And we really believe that prenup should be fair. I talk a lot about this in an ebook that we have on our site, and we can give you the link. It's a free download. But in that ebook, I talk about why, what I call the fairness quotient, why it's so important for a prenuptial agreement to be fair for a marriage, to be one that is open and comfortable. Both parties are comfortable talking about finances. And then Sarabeth has her own chapter where she actually talks about in great detail why she got a prenup. So we can provide you that link. It's a really great read. And then we have many other chapters from professionals, both attorneys in California, prenup coaches. And yeah, I would just highly recommend picking it up if this is something that you're considering.
Awesome. Yeah, and my final thoughts and advice are, at Brooklyn FI, we try to remove barriers to things. We give our clients a lot of tasks. You got to do this. It's going to be hard to get your will in place because then you got to find a notary and 2 witnesses. A prenup, you got to go talk to an attorney. You got to book a call. You got to spend, lawyers are scary. There's an hourly rate, and we don't know how many.
I didn't even get to that part. Yeah.
It's terrifying. I get it. So, like having a product where there's a fee, you see the fee, what it's going to look like, what the deliverable is going to be, it like in my opinion, completely changed. It made this a recommendation that clients are actually going to do, as opposed to like, yeah, of course we should get a prenup, but we're too busy. And, $10,000 is a lot, even if you're making a lot of money to spend on something that feels uncomfortable and that you don't really want to talk about with your partner. So
yeah.
Thank you both so much. This was so informative. Thanks to everyone who attended. Thanks to everyone who gave us some questions ahead of time. And we will post this on our website, brooklynfi.com/events in a few days. And I will grab all those links from the 2 of you. Thank you both so much. Enjoy.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Take
much.
care. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.